my name is Sharul, and just introduce our team. This is Ashwin, this is Anmol, this is Lucy, and that's Sanhua. Right, today we want to discuss the issue of cross-cultural miscommunications, especially when it comes to advertising and company slogans. We felt it was important for us to discuss this issue because the world around us, the world population is integrating at a very rapid pace. Okay, the evidence is all around us. We find that trade policies in the past few decades have been geared towards creating international partnerships, encouraging businesses to open up in new markets, right? And of course, the advancement of technology can literally allow you, at this very moment, in this room, to actually communicate with someone from the other side of the planet, assuming they're not sleeping. Of course, I will be providing. There are many types of communication. We want to zoom in on advertisements, partly because we can all attest to looking at interesting advertisements on a daily basis, but more importantly because it's such a powerful influence on cross-cultural interactions. Okay, especially here in Singapore, because we present ourselves as a multicultural society, and we want to learn how to respect other cultures. The best way is to effectively communicate amongst one another. Okay, so in a short while, I will provide you with an overview of what miscommunication really is. Okay, but before that, let me give you a walkthrough of what you will be getting out of this discussion from our other presenters. Okay, so later you will hear from Anmol, who will speak about advertising on a global scale. Okay, after that you hear from Sanhua. He will present a handful of amusing examples where cross-cultural miscommunications occurred in advertisements. Okay, from there, Ashwin will talk about, will further elaborate on the problems posed by miscommunication, and along the way he will provide suggestions on how these problems could have been avoided. Okay, and finally, Lucy will conclude with by proposing solutions, and at the same time, he will set it in a more local context, in a more Singapore context. All right, but before that, for us to understand what miscommunication is, we first have to understand what communication actually is. Okay, so first of all, okay, what's happening here is that right now I am communicating ideas to you through my voice. Okay, so this voice, my voice, okay, that's not me, that's someone who looks like me, but the sound waves coming from my mouth will be traveling to your ears, and it will be picked up by sensory receptors in your inner ear. What happens is one of the cranial nerves will actually transfer this to your brain, please, and then your beautiful minds will actually absorb this into and generate it into information and concepts that you can understand, that you understand. Now here's the problem. What if what I'm trying to say to you, what you understand isn't necessarily what I intended to relay? Okay, this is an example. Right? For example, what's your name? Sorry, Jesse. Hi, I'm Sharul. Okay, if I were to ask you to think of the color blue, right? Quite likely that, can I have the pointer, please? Quite likely that she might be thinking of teal blue, sky blue, or turquoise, or even spindrift. When in actual fact, I was actually thinking of eggplant, which to her would be purple, but to me it's still a shade of blue. Okay, so that's an instance of miscommunication. Okay, and the problem is, of course, in our daily lives, miscommunication isn't as simple and straightforward as that. But I think we now have a clearer understanding of what miscommunication, how miscommunication occurs. And if you haven't understood that, then I have successfully demonstrated miscommunication. Okay, so let's now learn from the next presenter about how miscommunication occurs, especially in the context of advertising on a global scale. Right, Amo, please.
So, thanks, Sharon. I'm talking about advertising. So, what is advertising? Advertising is a form of communication to kind of provide the customers details of products and services which the company provides and how and where to obtain them. Advertising is basically designed to generate increased consumption of products and services of the company by creating and reinforcing brand image as well as brand loyalty. Moving on to global advertising. To create a successful worldwide advertising campaign, there are four competing business objectives which must be balanced by a company. They are building a brand with one voice, developing economies of scale, maximizing local effectiveness of the ad campaign, and lastly, increasing the speed of implementation of the ad campaign in the country. The three hierarchical approaches which are fundamentally different to each other for to execute advertising campaign in a country. They are either exporting execution. What is exporting execution? Exporting executions is create the idea by, for example, American-based company creates an advertising campaign to use in maybe Indonesia. So that's exporting the idea to use in a different country. Producing local executions is to create the advertisement which caters to the local target segment. And last is importing ideas which travel. What this means is that you can use advertising idea campaign which can use in the home country of the company as well as in any other country. Moving on to impact of globalization on advertising. Over the last decade or so, globalization has occurred all over and there's been drastic changes. More and more companies have crossed domestic borders in order to raise capital, more customers, more money, more consumers. Globalization has affected a business's way of advertising as also on the way the company uses products to advertise to the consumer. Companies face a strategic dilemma on whether to use a global, uniform advertising campaign or whether they should use localized advertising campaigns in each country to target the local consumer. Many companies all over, which, irrespective of the size, small or big, have felt and got to know that an advertising campaign at a certain market will not have the same impact in another country or another target segment. Nowadays, what most companies use is a multi-domestic or international approach. That is, they have a campaign which is different for each country, and therefore the campaign is an international approach. Coming to the last part, is the impact of global advertising. Once a company decides to have a global advertising campaign, it's very important to consider language as well as cultural differences. A lot of times during the advertising campaign, language acts as a barrier. The few common mistakes or errors which do take place are carelessness, multiple meanings of words or phrases, wrong usage of idioms, and also mistranslations. We, in this presentation, in the next few slides, will be talking more about these as well as giving more examples. And last but not the least is humorous ad campaigns. A lot of times companies use campaigns, ad campaigns which might, in a certain country or target segment, appeal humorous for that consumer group, but when you transfer that advertising to another country, it might fall flat for the consumers. Now I'd like to pass on to John Ray, who will be talking more about giving examples on these mistranslations and how language acts as a barrier.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So as we all know, a slogan is a short, memorable sentence used in advertising, and it aims to publicize the product to get a positive impression, other than distracting people from buying it. And a good product name and slogan is very helpful for the company to sell the product. However, next I will introduce some of the unsuccessful cases, which are very interesting. The first one, the Schweppes tonic water. It's a well-known drink in our daily life, and I believe that many of you have drank it. It's a good drink, isn't it? So, however, it has faced a problem in Italy. That was translated into the Schweppes toilet water. So you can imagine the reaction of the Italian customer when they saw these drinks. Oh, I must go mad to buy the toilet water to drink. The next example is the Pepsi, whose original slogan is, "Come alive, you are in the Pepsi generation." So it was meant for the acceptance and popularity for those who have read this advertisement. However, in the Chinese market, it was translated into Pepsi bring your ancestors back from the dead. Wow, that was so magical and horrible. For KFC, its slogan is finger licking good. So it was to express that the food is very delicious, that after eating it, the customer can't help to licking their fingers to enjoy the tasty taste. However, what happened in China is that it translated into eat your fingers off. If I were the customer, I will never go to KFC anymore, I promise. I want to keep my fingers safe. So the Green Giant, an agricultural company with the slogan of the Jolly Green Giant. So in Arabic, it was translated into the intimidating green monster. Wow, do you buy a food with the name of the green monster? So actually, the similar problem has happened with the two car company, which is Ford. Every car has a high quality body, became every car has a high quality cars in Belgium. And for Volkswagen, the driver's warranty became the chauffeur's warranty in Spanish. So looking back into these interesting cases, what could we learn from it to avoid it happening in the future? So actually, most of the company they may face a problem when they enter a foreign market, and the main cause of this problem is a mistranslation. This translation are mainly just direct linguistic translation from their home culture, and the disconnection between their home culture to the so-called foreign culture result in such problem. And this problem will result in negative impression of customer, which they will spend a lot of money to re-campaigning to attract the customer back. So these cases teach us to be very careful and very mindful when you do the marketing in the foreign country. So next, Shin will present the solution and more detailed problems.
Thank you, Jean-Bois, for those examples. So I'm sure that you thought that a lot of these examples were really funny. They do make for hilarious reading material when it comes to it, but actually there is a really fundamental problem when it comes to companies advertising in different countries. And one of the key problems that we have identified is mistranslation or wrong translation. In the second half of the 20th century, a lot of the companies that were based in the United States were expanding into emerging markets, most notably India and China. And one of the two big names that we looked at, Pepsi and KFC, had advertisement campaigns that failed in these countries. This actually resulted in them losing a huge portion of their market share. We all know what they did wrong, we saw what they did wrong, but what could they have done to avoid it? So the solution to this is to involve native language speakers, people who are fluent in the native language, to come up with the advertisement in the first place. This ensures that the problem is addressed at its root when the advertisement is conceptualized itself, so the person can identify potential effects of the advertisement and whether it would be perceived as offensive by the intended audience. Secondly, as with all types of communication, it's very important to know who your audience is. It's important to be consumer-centric when you come to the marketing world, so that you can target your advertisements to the people that you want to impress and the target market. And to do this, you can do a focus group study of the advertisement. Before going public with an advertisement, have a small group of native language speakers and see how they react to the advertisement. And this can go a really long way in making sure that your campaign is effective and your message reaches the intended audience in the form that you intended it to, and it's not distorted in any way due to language barriers. Another issue that we want to highlight is cultural differences. This might not be really on the surface, it's a little more subtle than language differences when it comes to it, but people are very influenced by their upbringing. People living in different parts of the world, even though they might speak the same language, might share different ideas, thought processes, and societal norms depending on where they are. For example, an Indian or a Chinese living in Asia could think very differently from somebody living in Europe or America. So when advertisement campaigns are constructed, it's very important to consider this as well. And one of the failed ad campaigns is Hallmark. I'm sure all of you have heard of Hallmark. It's the company that makes gift cards, and they were very successful in the US and UK. The tagline of Hallmark was, "We make the messages for you." In countries like in America, where people are very busy, this was a very convenient solution when they wanted to give cards to their loved ones, because the message was already made. They just had to buy it, sign the card, and send it across. When Hallmark ventured into Europe, in particular France, what they did was they went with the same slogan, "We make the messages for you." But the French people are inherently very creative people, and they took offense at the idea of their messages being written by somebody else. They wanted to personalize the message, and this actually led to Hallmark pulling out of France for a brief period. How can you avoid this? It's very important that before you enter a new market, you understand the cultural differences and the cultural nuances of that particular country. And once you understand this, you have to incorporate these in the advertisement campaigns. This is not only limited to advertisements, it's common for any form of communication or any message that you intend to convey. We'd like to introduce a concept called globalization, which is a combination of global and local. the main idea is that you think globally and you act locally. A lot of these companies are global companies when it comes to it, so they do need to have a coherent brand image, a coherent message across the world. But at the same time, it's important to have locally customized campaigns. And I'd like to look at a few of the companies that have done this successfully. One is, of course, McDonald's. We all know about it. They have customized menus in different locations. For example, in India, they have the Mac Aloo Tikki, and they have the Mac Maharaja. In Singapore, they have the Teriyaki Burger and the Samurai Burger. Also, Volkswagen, when they ventured into the Middle East, they had a compass in the car that always pointed to Mecca, and they also had an electronic version of the Quran in the car, and they were really successful in these respective markets. That's it for my part, and to conclude the presentation, I'd like to pass on the stage to Shi.
Thank you, Ashwin. Now I believe we have already built up a good understanding and big picture on the intercultural communication, especially on the advertisement. And next, I'm going to conclude our presentation by applying it into the local context for you to have a better understanding how is this important and critical in our real life. Okay, as we all know, Singapore features itself as a multicultural, multi-language, and multi-religion countries. Okay, it seems so there are 5.5 million population in this island who are from diverse backgrounds. And in addition to that, according to the Singapore Tourism Board, there were 15.5 million tourists who came to Singapore in 2013. So with all this information here, we can tell that in Singapore, intercultural communication is a real issue and it's even a real challenge for us. Okay, so just now we have already discussed there are three main causes which could result in the miscommunication when you convey the message to your customers, which include the language, the custom, and also the religions. There are 4 official languages in Singapore: English, Chinese, Malay, and Tamil. So which means if you want to cover every Singaporean in Singapore for your advertisement, you have to make a 4-language version of your advertisement, which is quite costly. Okay. And as for the customs, every year there are 11 public holidays, which shows the respect of our government to different nationalities and different ethnic groups. And as for the religions, there are Christians, Buddhism, Taoism, Catholic, and Muslims, etc. So different groups have different kind of value system. And one thing acceptable here may be offensive in the other groups. That makes even more complicated in the business communication in Singapore compared to the other countries. Okay, so if you don't do it correctly or do it in a good way, which will result in some negative impression both on your brand equity or result in the loss of your revenue in the local market. So, but rest assured, our team has already proposed 3 possible solutions for you to tackle this problem: research, experiment, and also the globalization strategy. As for the research, the company should include at least a few locals when you design your advertisement to factor in the culture and the language components when you design the advertisement and your marketing campaign. And after you finish that, you should run a small experiment before you roll out the marketing campaign to the countrywide or to the worldwide. Okay, so most importantly, you should apply the globalization strategy, which is think globally and act locally. So with all this included, we can guarantee the company to minimize the miscommunication risk. And last but not least, I would like to share with you 3 takeaways for you from our group presentation. First, understand the importance of intercultural communication and respect different culture. Secondly, due diligence in the business communication. This not only applies to the advertisement, but also to the other business scenario. Let's say when we start to work in the future, we should do some research before we go attend the client meeting or before we write an email to the overseas colleagues. Last but not least, we should embrace the cultural diversity in Singapore and convert it to a personal strength in the business workplace. In a current globalized workplace, okay, this could benefit us a lot for the career development. With that, I would like to end our presentation. Thank you.
questions? Are there any questions about this application?
How this company respond once they realize they made a mistake and they pull out in the market? How do they respond and how do they get back?
Yeah, sure. So we've looked at two companies, KFC and Pepsi, right? So we saw how their ads went wrong, and of course, at that point in time, this was the 1980s, they did lose a significant portion of their market share. So what KFC is doing right now is that you can take China for example, the market that they failed in. Now they have advertisements where they incorporate a lot of Chinese celebrities, like they have Beijing opera dancer, opera singer who actually is in the advertisement itself, like the advertisement video itself. They're trying to embrace local culture by doing this. And also KFC has localized menus, localized advertisements in different parts of Asia. Pepsi as well has advertisements that endorse, they get local celebrities to endorse their brand. For example, in India, they have cricketers doing it. In Singapore, they do sponsor a lot of local events, like with their products. Any other questions?
If you would like to know more about the example